Now this is a very easy recipe, and it's an all-year-round recipe.
Toaster popping up and down, the blender turning round and round. Plus you get some Kool-Aid to make a homemade drink.
That's great!
There was a time when Betty Crocker taught millions of Americans how to pack a lunch that could survive until noon and still taste like someone cared. Those recipes are gone now, thrown out with the tin lunch pails and thermos bottles. But here's what nobody asks. When did we stop making lunches that meant something? Candle salad. Imagine it's 1952, and little Susan opens her lunchbox to find what looks like a burning candle on a plate. The other kids gather round, mesmerized. But this isn't wax and wick. It's a banana standing proud in a pineapple ring, crowned with a maraschino cherry flame, mayo dripping down like melted wax. This was the candle salad, and it was absolutely everywhere. Betty Crocker didn't just suggest this creation. She championed it with the enthusiasm of a carnival barker. Her cookbooks featured detailed diagrams showing the exact angle for banana placement, the precise mayo consistency for optimal wax drip effect. This wasn't just lunch. It was edible sculpture that somehow made perfect sense to a generation that believed food should entertain as much as nourish. The genius wasn't in the flavor. Let's be honest, mayonnaise on fruit was always going to be a tough sell. The genius was in understanding that children eat with their eyes first, their imagination second, and their mouths last. That banana candle transformed a boring lunch hour into theater. Every kid who brought one became the lunch table celebrity, if only for those precious 5 minutes. What we've forgotten is that these mothers weren't delusional. They knew exactly what they were creating, something so bizarre it demanded attention, so memorable it would be talked about at dinner. In an era before screens competed for children's focus, food had to work harder. It had to tell stories, create moments, build memories. Eggs a la goldenrod. There was a moment in every office building in 1948 when the secretarial pool would fall silent. It happened at noon, when Margaret from accounting would unpack her thermos and begin the ritual of eggs a la goldenrod. This wasn't just lunch. It was performance art with hard-boiled eggs. The dish sounds fancy because Betty Crocker knew that French words could transform anything. But strip away the pretense, and you had eggs in cream sauce on toast. The magic, and there was magic, happened in the presentation. The egg whites got chopped and folded into white sauce, thick enough to coat a spoon. But those yolks? Those got pushed through a sieve, falling like golden snow over the whole creation. Office workers treated this lunch like communion. They'd pack the components separately. Sauce in a thermos, toast wrapped in wax paper, the golden yolk crumbles in a small jar. At noon, they'd assemble it with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker, pour the warm sauce over toast, sprinkle the yolk threads on top, and suddenly their metal desk became a dining table. Betty's recipe came with lifestyle instructions. Prepare Sunday evening for the week ahead. Reheat gently while maintaining sauce consistency. Present on real plates when possible. This wasn't grab-and-go food. This was slow food before we had a name for it, intentional eating before it became a movement. The economics were beautiful. One egg could feed one person, but eggs a la goldenrod stretched that same egg to satisfy two. During the lean years after the war, this mathematics mattered. Betty understood that dignity mattered more than abundance. Better to eat half an egg that looked elegant than a whole egg that looked poor. What killed it wasn't the taste, properly made. It was creamy, comforting, with that sulphurous richness only egg yolk provides. What killed it was the working woman's revolution. The same women Betty was trying to help entered offices in record numbers, but with less time, not more. The ritual of lunch assembly became impossible when lunch breaks shrank to nothing. Today's sad desk salad is eggs a la goldenrod's grandson, portable, practical, joyless. We gained convenience but lost the ceremony. Betty's eggs asked you to stop, to honor your lunch break, to treat yourself like someone worth feeding well, even if you were eating alone, especially then. Sandwich loaf. The year was 1955, and Eleanor Williams was about to win the church potluck. Not with flavor, not with nutrition, but with the sheer audacity of her sandwich loaf, a 3-foot monument to processed cheese and determination, frosted like a wedding cake and sliced like bread. This was competitive homemaking at its most gloriously absurd. Betty Crocker didn't invent the sandwich loaf, but she perfected it, codified it, turned it into suburban warfare. Her cookbook devoted 20 pages to this one recipe. Diagrams of optimal filling distribution, charts for cream cheese consistency, troubleshooting guides for structural collapse. This was engineering dressed as cooking. The construction took 2 days. Day 1, slice the bread horizontally, spread each layer with different fillings, tuna salad, egg salad, ham and pickle, then stack and chill overnight. Day 2, frost the entire loaf with whipped cream cheese, decorate with piped roses, radish flowers, olive butterflies. The final product looked like something from a fever dream, but it photographed beautifully in black and white. Every church basement had its sandwich loaf champion. These women competed silently but viciously. Whose loaf stood tallest, sliced cleanest, lasted longest on the buffet table without sweating. The cream cheese frosting was the battlefield. Too thick and it overwhelmed the sandwiches. Too thin and you looked amateur. The perfect consistency was passed down mother to daughter like heirloom jewelry. The first slice was theater. You'd carry the loaf to the table whole, position it just so, then cut with ceremony. The crowd would gasp as the knife revealed those perfect stripes, pink ham, yellow egg, white tuna, geological layers of processed America. 3 men in a boat. Nobody asked for lunch to become a nautical adventure. But in 1952, Betty Crocker decided that's exactly what American children needed. 3 men in a boat wasn't just food, it was edible storytelling that turned a mundane potato into high seas drama. The setup was pure theater. A baked potato became the boat, split lengthwise and hollowed slightly. The sea was creamed chipped beef, that gray-beige military surplus that veterans knew by another name. But here's where imagination took over. 3 Vienna sausages stood at attention as sailors, triangular cheese slices caught the wind as sails, and suddenly Tuesday's lunch was an ocean voyage. Raggedy Ann salad. In 1947, Betty Crocker looked at a pile of vegetables and saw a child. Not metaphorically. She literally published instructions for building an edible doll that would haunt lunchboxes across America. The Raggedy Ann salad was either creative genius or psychological warfare, depending on which side of the lunch table you sat. The construction manual read like Dr. Frankenstein's notebook. Peach, half for the body, celery stalks for arms, carrot strips for legs, shredded cheese for hair. The face required artistic precision, raisins for eyes, cherry mouth, cream cheese mixed with food coloring for rosy cheeks. Some ambitious mothers added lettuce leaf dresses, turning vegetables into fashion statements. Fruit float with sherbet. The biggest lie Betty Crocker ever told was that the fruit float with sherbet was lunch. This was dessert in drag, Sugar wearing a business suit. But in 1954, if you served it in a tall glass with a sophisticated name, anything could be a noon meal. The recipe was embarrassingly simple: ginger ale, fruit chunks, and a scoop of sherbet slowly melting into sweet soup. But Betty dressed it up with language: refreshing lunch beverage, digestive properties of ginger, natural fruit sugars for sustained energy. Office secretaries became float architects. They'd pack the components separately: fruit in one container, ginger ale in a thermos, sherbet in a special insulated cup. Pigs in a blanket, original Betty style. Which of these forgotten lunches deserves a comeback? Tell me in the comments. I'm genuinely curious if anyone else remembers their grandmother's sandwich loaf or that weird banana candle thing. Before Pillsbury hijacked the concept with their crescent rolls, Betty Crocker's original Pigs in a Blanket was a masterpiece of griddle engineering. This wasn't convenience food. This was skilled labor that happened to involve hot dogs and pancake batter. The technique separated amateurs from artists. You'd pour a thin oval of pancake batter on a hot griddle, place the hot dog at one edge when bubbles formed, then roll it using two spatulas like you were swaddling a meat baby. Too early and the batter tore. Too late and you had a burnt blanket. The perfect pig required timing, temperature control, and the confidence of someone who'd done this 100 times. Betty's 1950 cookbook devoted 3 full pages to this recipe, 3 pages for wrapping hot dogs in pancakes. There were diagrams showing optimal batter thickness, 1/8 inch, rolling angles, 45 degrees, and exposed hot dog ratios, 15% on each end. This was the NASA of lunch preparation. Schools couldn't get enough. One pan could produce assembly line quantities. They required no utensils, survived temperature abuse, and contained all food groups if you squinted. The pancake counted as grain, the hot dog as protein, and if you added enough syrup, you'd consumed fruit. This was nutrition through creative accounting. The home version was where creativity exploded. Mothers would use squeeze bottles to create patterns, spirals, zigzags, plaids. Some added food coloring for holidays. Drum cake. The drum cake was Betty Crocker's proof that any food could be educational if you shaped it weird enough and added a fact sheet. This wasn't dessert, it was musical lunch, part of Betty's deranged 1954 series, where meals taught curriculum. The recipe required architectural precision. Roll sugar cookie dough into perfect cylinders, score them to simulate drum tension rods, paint with food coloring diluted to exact specifications. Pretzel sticks became drumsticks, positioned at realistic angles. When arranged in a lunchbox, you had an entire percussion section made of cookies that would dissolve into beige paste by noon. Betty published this alongside historical facts. The snare drum originated in medieval Europe, appeared next to instructions for creating realistic snare effects with silver dragées. Timpani can be tuned to different pitches, explained why your cookies needed varying circumferences. This was education through glucose, learning through lunch. Teachers developed complicated relationships with drum cakes. Music teachers loved them. Finally, children understood percussion instruments. Regular teachers hated them. Cookie drums make excellent actual drums when pounded on desks. The 1957 edition included a disclaimer about encouraging gentle consumption and respecting classroom acoustics. The 2-day preparation process tested maternal dedication. Day 1, make dough, chill overnight. Day 2, shape, bake, cool. Paint. With food coloring using actual paintbrushes, Betty insisted you buy specifically for food art. The painting took longer than the baking. One mother wrote that she spent 3 hours creating realistic wood grain on 12 cookie drums, only to watch her son eat them in 3 minutes. Prune Shake. Nobody wanted to love the Prune Shake, but Betty Crocker made it impossible to hate. This was liquid dignity, Depression-era ingenuity blended with ice cream and served with a paper straw. It was everything wrong with 1940s nutrition, and somehow everything right with human adaptation. The recipe was deceptively luxurious. Stewed prunes blended with vanilla ice cream, whole milk, and a whisper of nutmeg. The result was thick, sweet, and mysteriously sophisticated, like chocolate's elderly aunt who'd traveled abroad and come back interesting. Betty published it as a healthful lunch beverage, which was code for, "This will keep you regular, but we're not saying that out loud." Office workers developed elaborate prune shake protocols. You'd blend it at home, pour it into a thermos, and consume it quickly at lunch before anyone asked questions. If someone did ask, you'd say it was a chocolate shake and change the subject. This was collective delusion maintained through social contract. The shake created its own economy. Secretaries would pool resources. Sarah brought prunes, Margaret had ice cream access, Dorothy's husband worked at the dairy. They'd blend batches in the break room's new Oysterizer, the whir of the blender announcing lunch hour's arrival. Finsa Kakor. Finska Kakor was Betty Crocker admitting she wasn't just about American convenience. She could deliver European sophistication to a Minnesota lunch table, assuming you owned specialized equipment and had inherited patience from your Scandinavian grandmother. These Finnish cookies weren't cookies at all, but elaborate almond sculptures that required a cookie press, pearl sugar you had to order from Minneapolis, and the kind of time that only existed before television. The process was meditation disguised as baking. Cream butter until white as January snow. Add almond extract, drop by precious drop. Fold in flour so gradually that each addition was a whisper. But Betty positioned these as lunch cookies served with strong coffee in proper cups and saucers. This was adult lunch, sophisticated lunch, the kind you ate while discussing literature. The cookies were so buttery they dissolved on your tongue, leaving only the crunch of pearl sugar and the ghost of almonds. Women formed Finska Kakor clubs, sharing the expensive equipment and buying pearl sugar in bulk. The cookies became currency in the suburban social economy. Bringing Finska Kakor to church lunch meant you had equipment, ingredients, skill, and most importantly, time. Golden egg cake. There's a photo in my mother's album from 1952, the church bake sale table, and right in the center, Mrs. Henderson's golden egg cake, glowing like a rectangular sun. That cake, my mother would say, used every yolk from Easter week. 12 eggs. We thought she'd lost her mind until we tasted it. The golden egg cake was Betty Crocker's answer to a very specific problem: what to do with a dozen egg yolks when everyone was making angel food cake. Betty's solution became lunch legend, a cake so rich it could replace a meal, so yellow it looked radioactive. This wasn't delicate or light. 12 egg yolks, a full pound of butter, enough sugar to make your teeth ache. It was excess disguised as frugality, indulgence justified by waste reduction. The texture was uncanny, almost savory, like French toast that had evolved into cake form. Betty positioned this as a lunch cake, suitable for slicing thin and serving with coffee. But everyone knew this was breakfast dessert, the kind of thing you ate standing over the kitchen counter at 10 a.m. when nobody was watching. The recipe created its own economy. Women coordinated baking schedules. I'm making angel food Saturday. Who needs yolks? Church bulletins had standing trades. They'd meet in parking lots to exchange ingredients like some kind of suburban egg black market. The golden egg cake couldn't survive cholesterol panic. Light as feather muffins. My aunt still has the letter Betty Crocker's test kitchen sent her in 1959. Thank you for your testimony about our light as feather muffins, saving your marriage, she framed it. It hangs in her kitchen next to her wedding photo. The light as feather muffins were liars, but the good kind. They weren't light. They were dense, buttery bombs that could replace a full meal, but the name made you feel virtuous eating them. The secret was technique, not ingredients. Separate eggs, whip whites to soft peaks, cream butter until practically white, then fold everything together with the patience of a cardiac surgeon. The result was a muffin with a crispy exterior that shattered at first bite, revealing an interior so tender it barely held together. These required special equipment, not regular muffin tins, but shallow, wide French muffin plaques nobody owns anymore. The shape mattered. Wide and flat meant more crust, less center. The perfect ratio of crunch to soft. My grandmother swore her light as feather muffins got my grandfather his promotion. His boss came for dinner, took one bite, and asked for the recipe. Next week, Harold was regional manager. This seems ridiculous until you taste one made correctly. Then you understand how baked goods might alter destinies. What killed them wasn't health consciousness, but equipment. The special pans disappeared from stores. Most importantly, muffins became grab-and-go food. Oatmeal muffins. The summer of 1961, my My mother worked at the Campbell's Soup Factory in Camden. Every morning, the ladies in her line would bring oatmeal muffins, not the same recipe, but variations passed down through families, each claiming superiority. By Thursday, those Monday muffins had transformed into something almost magical, dense, moist, tasting like Christmas even in July. Betty Crocker's oatmeal. Muffins weren't the dry, hockey puck bran bombs that killed the muffin reputation. These were different. Scottish oats, soaked in buttermilk overnight, transforming into something between cake and pudding. The technique was specific. Exactly 8 hours of soaking. Too long and the oats turned to paste. Too short and the muffins had the texture of wet sand mixed with regret. The beauty was their longevity. Baked on Sunday, they'd last through Friday, getting better each day. The oats continued absorbing moisture, creating an almost custard-like interior by day 3. Office workers would pack them at week's start, knowing Thursday's muffin would be superior to Monday's. This was planned obsolescence in reverse. Food that improved with age. Betty marketed these as building food, construction worker lunch, farmer breakfast, food for people who used their bodies for money. The recipe appeared in special editions distributed at factories and construction sites. Best BRAN muffins, Dr. Harrison's waiting room, 1958. My grandmother sat there with her digestive troubles, clutching a Betty Crocker cookbook. The doctor walked out, saw the book, and said, "Page 247, Best BRAN muffins. Take 2 and call me never." That was medical care in the Eisenhower era. Prescribed muffins and plausible deniability. Betty Crocker's Best BRAN muffins carried a name that was both promise and threat. Best implied competition suggested others had failed where these succeeded, and they had to be best, because convincing Americans to eat BRAN in the 1950s required exceptional salesmanship and enough molasses to mask the fact you were essentially eating horse feed. The recipe was chemical engineering disguised as baking. BRAN doesn't want to be a muffin. It wants to be livestock feed or cereal or anything but delicate baked good. Betty's solution involved so much molasses, butter, and sugar that the BRAN became merely a passenger in its own muffin. The health food was drowning in everything that made it unhealthy, which was exactly the point. But here's the genius. They actually tasted incredible. The molasses added depth, almost coffee-like bitterness balanced by sweetness. The BRAN provided texture, little pockets of crunch in the tender crumb. Served warm with butter melting into those craggy tops, they made you forget you were eating something supposedly good for you. This was medicine that tasted like dessert. French breakfast puffs. The lie started with the name. French breakfast puffs were neither French nor breakfast, but Mrs. Davidson served them at her Tuesday lunch club in 1959 and started a suburban arms race that lasted until Kennedy was shot, and everyone forgot about competitive baking for a while. Betty Crocker introduced these in 1952 with the note that they were inspired by continental bakeries, which was marketing speak for, "We made this up, but it sounds fancy." The French had never heard of breakfast puffs. French breakfast was coffee and existential dread, maybe a cigarette. But American audiences didn't know that, and Betty wasn't telling. The recipe was suspiciously simple for something claiming European heritage. Muffin batter enriched with nutmeg, baked until barely golden, then immediately rolled in melted butter and cinnamon sugar while still warm. The butter soaked in, creating a crispy, soft exterior that shattered at first bite, revealing steaming, tender insides that made you question everything you knew about muffins. But here's where genius lived, the double coating technique. First, melted butter, applied with a pastry brush like you were restoring the Mona Lisa. Then, while still wet, a roll in cinnamon sugar mixed with just enough salt to make you need another one. Some advanced bakers did a double dip. Butter, sugar, creating a shell so perfect it should have been illegal. What made French breakfast puffs perfect lunch food was their temperature flexibility, asking if the recipe was chemically enhanced. It wasn't, just perfectly calibrated for American taste, sweet, salty, buttery, and pretending to be something fancier than it was. Death came slowly. Food Network chefs explained what French breakfast really was. The internet made cultural accuracy mandatory. French breakfast puffs became became embarrassing, like calling spray cheese fromage. We gained authenticity, but lost the joy of eating donut disguised as muffins, disguised as European sophistication. Tomato Aspic, the church basement, summer 1962. Mrs. Wellington's tomato aspic sat on the buffet table like a red traffic light, warning and attracting in equal measure. It quivered when people walked by, as if it were alive, afraid, knowing what was coming. This wasn't just lunch. It was edible architecture that jiggled. Nothing says lunch in 1955, quite like a quivering red mass of jellied tomato juice pretending to be salad. Tomato aspic wasn't just food. It was architectural statement, chemical achievement, and social currency, all molded into a ring of savory jello that nobody asked for but everyone made. Betty Crocker dedicated 8 pages to tomato aspic in her 1950 cookbook, including diagrams for achieving perfect clarity and preventing layer separation. This was serious business. The tomato juice had to be seasoned just right. Too much Worcestershire and it was brown. Too little and it was bland. The gelatin ratio required precision. Too much and you were eating rubber. Too little and your aspic collapsed into soup at room temperature. The mold mattered more than the food. Copper fish molds, ceramic ring molds, individual flower shapes. The container communicated class. Betty's illustrations showed 37 different mold options, each with specific release techniques. Oil lightly with mayonnaise for easy unmolding became kitchen scripture. The woman with the most molds won, even if nobody ate what came out of them. But here's what nobody admits. Properly made tomato aspic was actually good. The acidity of tomato, the umami of Worcestershire, the brightness of lemon, all concentrated and chilled into something that cleansed your palate and felt sophisticated. It was gazpacho that held its shape, Bloody Mary you could slice. The presentation ritual was pure theater. You'd carry the mold to the table covered, build suspense, then lift to reveal the aspic standing free. That moment when everyone held their breath, waiting to see if it would hold or collapse into tomato-flavored failure. The garnish took another 20 minutes. Mayonnaise rosettes piped with professional precision, olive slices arranged like flowers, celery leaves placed just so. My mother's friend Janet once brought an aspic to a funeral luncheon that was so perfect, so crystalline, with shrimp suspended at exact intervals like insects in amber, that nobody would eat it. It sat there, untouched, a monument to wasted effort. She took it home and threw it at her husband, who'd suggested she make something simple for the funeral. The divorce papers cited irreconcilable differences, but everyone knew it was about the aspic. Office lunches featured competitive aspic displays. Secretary pools would coordinate colors: red tomato Monday, green cucumber Tuesday, golden chicken Wednesday. The woman with the clearest aspic, the most perfect mold release, the most artistic garnish won unspoken victories in the suburban social wars. Mock oyster stew. Tastes just like the real thing, my grandfather lied through his teeth, spooning another mouthful of Betty Crocker's mock oyster stew. It was 1943. Real oysters were for rich people, and Grandma's eggplant version was all we were getting. He ate 3 bowls to prove his point, then spent the evening looking confused about what he'd just consumed. During the Depression, when real oysters were luxury and milk was barely affordable, Betty Crocker performed culinary alchemy, turning eggplant into convincing seafood. Mock oyster stew wasn't just economical substitution. It was gastronomic gaslighting at its finest. The deception was brilliant. Eggplant, cut into oyster-sized pieces and salted to draw out moisture, developed a slippery, briny texture eerily similar to actual oysters. Simmered in milk with butter, celery, and the crucial addition of soy sauce, it created a stew that fooled people who knew better. Betty's recipe came with psychological preparation. Serve without explanation. allow guests to enjoy before revealing the economical secret. This wasn't just cooking instruction, it was social engineering. The recipe literally included lying by omission as a serving suggestion. Schools and hospitals adopted mock oyster stew because it solved multiple problems. Children who wouldn't eat vegetables ate oysters. The Catholic Church approved it for Friday meals. It counted as abstaining from meat while feeling like indulgence. Everyone was lying to everyone, and everyone was fine with it. My grandmother's church cookbook included her annotation, "Served this to Harold's boss." He asked for seconds in the recipe, never told him. He's still talking about my excellent oysters 20 years later. This wasn't just deception. It was a long con maintained through decades of dinner parties. Mock oyster stew disappeared when actual oysters became affordable and eggplant became trendy. We no longer needed to pretend vegetables were seafood, but something was lost: the creativity of constraint, the art of delicious deception. Creamed chipped beef on toast. My uncle came back from Korea in 1953 with two things: a Purple Heart and a violent hatred of creamed chipped beef. SOS, he'd mutter whenever Mom made it. Same old shit, but he'd eat 3 servings anyway, like he was punishing himself for surviving while better men didn't. Every veteran knows this dish by another name, but Betty Crocker transformed battlefield survival food into suburban comfort lunch. This was war rations dressed in white sauce, memories of mess halls disguised as home cooking. The beef came in glass jars, paper-thin slices of salt-cured meat that looked like edible leather and tasted like concentrated ocean. You'd rinse it, tear it into pieces, and fold it into white sauce, so thick you could spackle walls with it. This gray-beige slurry got poured over toast, preferably slightly stale for structural integrity. Betty's genius wasn't improving the recipe. It was impossible to improve. Instead, she recontextualized it. What was punishment in mess halls became comfort in home kitchens. She added suggestions: paprika for color, peas for the fiction of vegetables. These additions didn't help, but they made you feel like you were cooking. The dish had its own physics. The sauce cooled rapidly, congealing into paste. The toast grew soggy from bottom up. There was a 5-minute window between ready and ruined. You ate it fast, standing over the stove, or not at all. Office workers packed deconstructed versions. Toast in one container, beef mixture in a thermos, assembly at noon. The smell, salt, milk, and something indefinably military filled break rooms. Veterans would appear from nowhere, drawn by scent memory. "Haven't had SOS since Normandy," they'd say, then eat 2 servings while staring at nothing. My uncle eventually taught Mom the right way to make it, the way that reminded him least of Korea. More pepper, less salt, bread toasted darker, so you can taste something besides memories. He'd eat it once a month, always on a Tuesday, always alone, always with a beer that he'd nurse but never finish. Schools served it because it met every nutritional requirement while costing nothing. Protein, dried beef, dairy, white sauce, grain, toast, vegetable. The parsley garnish nobody ate. It looked like wallpaper paste, tasted like nostalgia, and filled stomachs for hours. Mock chicken salad. The summer of 1944, my grandmother served mock chicken salad at her wedding reception. Real chicken was impossible to get. The war took everything with feathers, but she made do with hard-boiled eggs and enough mayonnaise and denial to feed 50 guests. Nobody complained. Half the men were heading to Europe. This might be their last homemade meal. During World War II rationing, when real chicken was scarce, Betty Crocker invented a chicken salad that contained no chicken, no salad, and barely qualified as food. But mock chicken salad filled lunch sandwiches across America, proving that necessity and mayonnaise could make anything edible. The base was hard-boiled eggs, lots of them, chopped fine, mixed with enough mayonnaise to achieve spreadable consistency, then seasoned with poultry seasoning until your brain believed it was eating chicken. Celery added crunch. Pickle relish added tang. Yellow food coloring added the visual lie that this was somehow poultry-based. Betty's 1943 recipe included the note, "Seasoning is crucial for achieving authentic flavor." This was code for add enough sage and thyme that people stop asking questions. The texture work was masterful. Eggs chopped to varied sizes created the illusion of white and dark meat. Celery cut on the bias mimicked chicken's fibrous quality. Office workers brought mock chicken sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, the mayonnaise seeping through by lunch. Nobody discussed what they were eating. There was collective agreement to maintain the fiction. "Great chicken salad, Martha." "Thank you, Helen." Both knew, neither acknowledged. My grandmother kept making mock chicken salad after the war ended, after real chicken became plentiful. "It tastes like victory," she'd say, which made no sense unless you'd been there, unless you understood that sometimes lying about lunch meant believing in tomorrow. Tuna potato chip casserole. Mrs. Henderson brought tuna potato chip casserole to the 1957 church potluck and changed everything. Not because it was good, it was objectively terrible, but because she'd turned garbage into gold using only shelf-stable ingredients and audacity. Within a month, every housewife in town had their own version. Before it became ironic potluck humor, tuna potato chip casserole was Betty Crocker's answer to the working mother's prayer. Something hot, filling, and ready in 30 minutes, using only ingredients that never expired. The recipe read like a grocery store clearance rack. Canned tuna, cream of mushroom soup, frozen peas, and an entire bag of crushed potato chips. Layer, bake, serve. No fresh ingredients, no chef technique, no apologies. This was American convenience crystallized into casserole form. Betty introduced it in 1955 as Busy Day Tuna Bake, but everyone called it that thing with the chips on top. The genius was the potato chip crust. Not breadcrumbs, not crackers, but actual potato chips, transforming guilty snack food into legitimate recipe component. This was the moment America stopped pretending to have standards. The chemistry was perfect despite itself. Chips provided salt and crunch. Soup added unctuousness. Tuna brought protein. Peas offered the fiction of vegetables. Together they created something greater than their shameful parts. A dish that tasted like childhood, even if your childhood predated its invention. Assembly required no skill, which was the point. Open cans, dump in dish, crush chips with your hands, the only fun part. Sprinkle on top. The oven did everything else. 30 minutes later, golden bubbling proof that cooking didn't require cooking ability. My mother's bridge club had a tuna potato chip crisis in 1958. Everyone brought the same casserole to the potluck, having independently decided it was easy. 7 identical casseroles sat on the buffet table like a comment on suburban conformity. They ate all 7. Nobody complained. The recipe spawned infinite variations. Fritos instead of potato chips, salmon replacing tuna, cream of celery when mushroom ran out. Each family developed their own version, defended it vigorously, claimed it was completely different despite being functionally identical. Churches still serve tuna potato chip casserole at funerals. That specific Methodist comfort food that says, "We're sorry for your loss. Here's some carbs." It appears at potlucks with apologetic notes. Grandma's recipe, as if age excuses ingredients. The casserole endures because it's honest. No pretense of health, no claims of authenticity, no garnish that matters. It's American food at its most American. Convenience wearing comfort's clothing. Cornflake-coated Spam patties. "What in the Sam Hill is that?" my father asked, watching Mom roll Spam in cornflakes like she was breading the family dog. It was 1953, and Betty Crocker had just convinced American mothers that breakfast cereal was breading and mystery meat was lunch. "It's Hawaiian style," Mom lied, having never been west of Ohio. Dad ate 3 and asked for the recipe. In 1953, Betty Crocker looked at a can of Spam and a box of cornflakes and thought, "These should unite in holy matrimony." The result was cornflake-coated Spam patties, a dish that sounds like punishment but tasted like Saturday morning merged with Tuesday's lunch. The process was disturbingly simple. Slice Spam into half-inch rounds, dip in beaten egg, roll in crushed cornflakes, fry until golden. The cornflakes created a crust that shattered at first bite, revealing steaming processed meat within. It was textural paradise for people who didn't ask questions about ingredients. Betty marketed these as fun lunch for active families, which was code for cheap protein your kids might actually eat. Cornflake coating transformed Spam from wartime embarrassment to crispy delight. This was alchemy through breakfast cereal, dignity through crunch. Schools adopted these because they solved the SPAM problem. Post-war surplus meant cafeterias had pallets of canned meat that children wouldn't eat plain, but coated in cornflakes? Suddenly it was crispy meat cookies and plates emptied. This was child psychology through texture, nutrition through deception. The variations got creative within constraints. Rice Krispies for lighter coating, Frosted Flakes for sweet-savory confusion, Wheaties for the health food version, as if coating Spam in sports cereal made it athletic. What killed cornflake-coated Spam patties wasn't health consciousness. We still eat plenty of processed meat. It was shame. Somewhere we decided Spam was embarrassing, cornflakes were for breakfast only, and combining them was admitting defeat. Hot dog crown casserole. The Christmas of 1958, Aunt Dorothy arrived with her hot dog crown casserole, and my grandfather, who'd survived Normandy, looked at it and said, "Now that's the most terrifying thing I've ever seen." It was a fortress of mashed potatoes with hot dogs, standing at attention like meat soldiers, filled with baked beans, like it was defending something. The hot dog crown casserole was Betty Crocker's most architecturally ambitious lunch, requiring engineering skills typically reserved for suspension bridges. This wasn't just food. It was edible sculpture that happened to contain processed meat. The construction began with mashed potato foundation, pressed into a ring mold with the density of concrete. Then came the hot dogs, standing vertically like meat sentinels, pressed into the potato perimeter at precise intervals, center filled with baked beans. The whole thing baked until the hot dogs bronzed and the potatoes formed a crust. Betty's 1957 illustration showed exact hot dog angles, 15 degrees outward, lean for optimal stability. This was geometry disguised as lunch preparation. The cookbook included equations, actual mathematical equations for hot dog placement. The unmolding was theater. You'd invert the pan, tap 3 times, Betty specified 3 like it was a magic spell, and lift to reveal a crown of hot dogs protecting a molten core of beans. It looked like a meat fortress, something a child might nightmare after too much carnival food. The recipe included variation suggestions that pushed boundaries of sanity. Holiday crown with red and green peppers. Birthday crown with hot dogs, spelling ages. Each more ambitious and disturbing than the last. A hot dog crown. Casserole died when we developed shame. Not much shame. We still eat terrible things. But just enough shame to recognize that hot dogs shouldn't stand at attention. Macaroni and prunes bake. "Is this pasta?" my brother asked, poking at the macaroni and prunes bake like it might move. It was 1962. Mom was trying every recipe in her new Betty Crocker cookbook, and we were the victims. "It's sweet," she said defensively. "Italians eat sweet pasta." Italians did not eat sweet pasta. Italians would have declared war over this pasta. Betty Crocker's macaroni and prunes bake occupies a special place in culinary history as the dish nobody admits existed. It was sweet pasta before dessert, pasta was acceptable. Dried fruit in main courses before tagines went mainstream. The recipe was deceptively simple. elbow macaroni, stewed prunes, cottage cheese, and enough cinnamon to make you forget you were eating fruit pasta for lunch. Betty positioned this as economical family fare, which was Depression-era code for "we have prunes and pasta, make it work." The texture was intentionally unsettling. Soft pasta, softer prunes, cottage cheese curds throughout, nothing crunched, everything yielded. It was baby food for adults, comfort food for the uncomfortable. Schools embraced macaroni and prunes because it met nutritional requirements through creative categorization. Prunes, dairy, cottage cheese, protein, denial. The variations revealed regional desperation. Southern versions added marshmallows. Midwest added ground beef, creating sweet-savory chaos that violated Geneva Convention guidelines about food. "It's not that bad if you don't think about it," became the unofficial slogan of families serving this dish. This was food that required mental dissociation to consume. The dish disappeared completely by 1960, scrubbed from cookbooks like a war crime. Hamburger upside-down pie. "Why is it upside down?" I asked Mom in 1959, watching her flip a pan like she was performing an exorcism. "Because Betty Crocker said so," she replied, as meat and biscuit crashed onto the plate in what looked like edible wreckage. Logic was not invited to the creation of hamburger upside-down pie. This was Betty Crocker's fever dream of efficiency, a main course that baked its own crust, inverted reality, and somehow convinced 1950s America this was easier than regular pie. The process defied physics. You'd brown ground beef with onions, spread it in a pan, pour biscuit batter on top, bake until golden, then flip the entire thing onto a plate. The meat ended up on top, the crust below. Gravity temporarily defeated by Betty's will. Key was the flip, what Betty called the moment of truth. Too early, and the biscuit collapsed into sad, wet dough. Too late, and it welded to the pan like industrial adhesive. The instruction manual included diagrams showing proper wrist position, optimal flip velocity, and recovery positions for failure. Office potlucks featured competitive flipping. Women would perform the inversion publicly, the crowd gasping as the pie either landed perfectly or collapsed into what Betty generously called deconstructed pie. Success meant social victory. Failure meant bringing cookies next time. What killed hamburger upside-down pie was success rate. Maybe 1 in 3 flipped correctly. For those who mastered it, the moment when the pan lifted and the pie stood proud, that was worth 20 failures. Bolognia peanut butter roll-ups. "This is child abuse," my older sister said, watching Mom spread peanut butter on Bolognia like she was committing a crime. Too late, and it welded to the pan like industrial adhesive. The instruction manual included diagrams showing proper wrist position, optimal flip velocity, and recovery positions for failure. Office potlucks featured competitive flipping. Women would perform the inversion publicly, the crowd gasping as the pie either landed perfectly or collapsed into what Betty generously called deconstructed pie. Success meant social victory. Failure meant bringing cookies next time. What killed hamburger upside-down pie was success rate. Maybe 1 in 3 flipped correctly, but for those who mastered it, the moment when the pan lifted and the pie stood proud, that was worth 20 failures. Bolognia peanut butter roll-ups. "This is child abuse," my older sister said, watching Mom spread peanut butter on Bolognia like she was committing a crime. It was 1961, and Betty Crocker had convinced America that any 2 proteins could be friends if you rolled them tight enough. At the intersection of poverty and creativity sat Bolognia peanut butter roll-ups. Betty Crocker's answer to the question nobody asked: what if we combined the 2 cheapest proteins into one cylindrical nightmare? The recipe was insultingly simple. Spread peanut butter on Bolognia, roll tight, secure with toothpick, slice into pinwheels. Betty marketed these to mothers packing lunches for active children, which meant kids who needed calories and didn't ask questions. The texture was the real crime. Soft Bolognia, sticky peanut, butter, nothing to break the monotony of yield. It was like eating a meat-flavored stress ball. The toothpicks were the only structural element preventing total collapse, and half the time kids ate those too. Schools served these during the peanut butter surplus of 1962, when government warehouses overflowed with ground nuts. Bolognia peanut butter roll-ups were born from bureaucratic necessity. This was policy made edible, government surplus wrapped in shame. Children developed Stockholm Syndrome for these roll-ups. Letters to Betty Crocker included phrases like, "My favorite lunch," and "Please send more recipes," proving that childhood taste buds exist in a different reality where meat and peanut butter naturally pair. The roll-ups disappeared when peanut allergies became recognized. Suddenly, weaponizing peanut butter in unexpected meat delivery systems seemed dangerous rather than creative. Banana mayonnaise salad. "Is this a threat?" my father asked, staring at the banana mayonnaise salad Mom had placed before him. It was 1959, and Betty Crocker had convinced housewives that any food plus mayonnaise equaled salad. Dad ate one bite, put down his fork, and went to the garage. He stayed there until dinner. Betty Crocker's banana mayonnaise salad was the dish that made people question everything they knew about fruit, condiments, and the very nature of salad itself. It wasn't content to be weird. It insisted on being presented on lettuce leaves like it belonged in polite company. The base recipe was criminally simple. Sliced bananas, coated in mayonnaise, rolled in chopped peanuts. Some versions added maraschino cherries, because if you're already committing food crimes, why not add a garnish? Betty introduced this in 1934 as part of her Southern Hospitality collection, claiming it was inspired by traditional Southern cuisine. Southern cooks wrote angry letters denying responsibility. This was nobody's tradition. It was Betty's fever dream, marketed as heritage. The assembly required speed. Bananas brown, mayonnaise separates. The window between preparation and presentation was minutes. This was not make-ahead food. It was make and immediately consume before you think about it food. Office lunchrooms witnessed banana mayonnaise salad assembly with horrified fascination. The sight of someone coating fruit with mayonnaise violated fundamental food laws. Yet some people ate it regularly, claiming it was refreshing and surprisingly good. Schools served it exactly once before universal rejection. Children, who would eat almost anything, drew the line at mayonnaise fruit. Cafeteria workers found full plates in trash cans, the banana-mayo combination finally finding something it couldn't survive. Childhood honesty. Pickle stuffed meatloaf. "There's something in the meatloaf," my brother announced at dinner, 1956, holding up a slice with a perfect green circle in the center. "It's a pickle," Mom said proudly. "Betty Crocker says it adds moisture." My father looked at his plate like it had betrayed him. Betty Crocker looked at regular meatloaf and decided it wasn't surprising enough. Her solution: hide entire pickles inside, creating a meal that revealed its secrets only when sliced. Pickle-stuffed meatloaf was dinner as magic trick, lunch as revelation. The construction required architectural precision. Form meat mixture into rectangle, place whole dill pickles lengthwise down center, fold meat around pickles, seal edges, pray. The goal was pickle surprise in every slice, green circles surrounded by brown meat, like some kind of carnivorous tree trunk cross-section. Betty's 1955 instructions included diagrams showing pickle placement for optimal distribution and visual impact. 3 pickles for standard loaf was the golden ratio, discovered through what must have been disturbing trial and error. The first slice was performance. You'd carry the loaf to table whole, slice with ceremony, reveal the hidden pickles. Children gasped. Adults pretended surprise despite knowing exactly what was inside. This was participatory dinner theater where everyone knew the script but performed anyway. The variations revealed American excess: olive-stuffed meatloaf, cheese-stuffed meatloaf, hard-boiled egg-stuffed meatloaf, creating a turducken of lunch proteins. Betty published them all, never questioning whether things should be stuffed just because they could be. Cabbage and noodles with bacon grease. "This is what we ate in the mines," my grandfather said, watching Grandma pour bacon grease over cabbage and noodles like she was anointing them. It was 1951, and this wasn't Betty Crocker trying to be fancy. This was Betty acknowledging that sometimes lunch was whatever kept you standing. This wasn't Betty Crocker trying to be fancy. Cabbage and noodles with bacon grease was Betty admitting defeat, acknowledging that sometimes lunch was just whatever kept you standing. This was mining town food, factory food, food that admitted what it was: fuel disguised as a hot meal. The recipe didn't even pretend to be healthy. Render bacon until crispy, remove bacon, keep all the grease. Sauté cabbage in that grease until it surrendered. Add cooked noodles, toss until everything glistened with pork fat. Crumble bacon on top if you're feeling fancy, or save it for tomorrow if you're being practical. Betty published this in her 1942 Economical Meals section with unusual honesty. Filling, warming, and affordable. No claims about nutrition, no garnish suggestions, no attempt to make it sound like anything other than survival food that tasted good enough to not complain about. The beauty was in the transformation. Cabbage, cheap and available year-round, became silky and sweet when cooked in bacon fat. Noodles absorbed the grease, becoming rich and satisfying. Together they created something that cost pennies but ate like dollars. This was alchemy through animal fat. Workers packed this in wide mouth. Thermoses, the bacon grease congealing into white streaks by lunch. "Smells like poverty," my uncle would say. "Tastes like survival," Grandpa would respond. And that would end the conversation. "Vinegar cobbler, what kind of pie is this?" I asked Grandma in 1958, taking a bite of what looked like apple cobbler but tasted like broken promises. "Vinegar," she said matter-of-factly, "from the Depression. When we didn't have fruit, we had vinegar." I put down my fork. She kept eating. During the Depression, when fruit was luxury and sugar was gold, Betty Crocker published a cobbler recipe that used neither. Vinegar cobbler was alchemy born from desperation. Apple cider vinegar pretending to be fruit-filling, convincing nobody but feeding everybody. The science was sound, if disturbing. Vinegar's acidity mimicked fruit tartness. Sugar and butter created the sweet-sour balance of real cobbler. The biscuit topping covered the lie. From above, it looked legitimate. Only the first bite revealed the deception. Betty's 1936 recipe came with unusual defensiveness, surprisingly delicious when fresh fruit is unavailable. This was Betty acknowledging that vinegar cobbler was last resort, but sometimes last resort was all you had. The recipe appeared in the emergency desserts section, though it often served as lunch. The preparation required faith. Mixing vinegar with sugar and butter created a liquid that smelled like salad dressing and looked like nothing you'd want to eat. But heat transformed it. The vinegar mellowed, the sugar caramelized, and somehow it became almost pie-like. Almost. Schools served vinegar cobbler during the worst of the Depression, calling it pioneer pie or frontier cobbler to make it sound adventurous rather than desperate. Children ate it because it was sweet and warm, two things that mattered more than ingredients. "Tastes like the idea of pie," one letter to Betty's test kitchen read. This was philosophy through food criticism. It wasn't pie. It was the memory of pie, the suggestion of pie, pie's poor cousin who nobody invited to gatherings. Dried beef, cheese ball, and here we are at the end with Aunt Margaret's dried beef cheese ball sitting on the coffee table at the 1963 New Year's Eve party, sweating slightly under the lamp, surrounded by Ritz crackers arranged like soldiers protecting a meat and dairy general. "It's elegant," she insisted, though it looked like something that had rolled out from under the refrigerator. The dried beef cheese ball was Betty Crocker's final frontier, party food made from rations, elegance constructed from shelf-stable ingredients. This was the dish that proved anything could be appetizer if you rolled it into a ball and stuck toothpicks in it. The base was cream cheese mixed with dried beef, Worcestershire sauce, onion powder, and whatever else might mask the fact that you were essentially eating a ball of preserved meat and dairy. Roll it in chopped nuts or parsley, refrigerate, until firm, and present it like you'd made something special. Betty introduced this in 1958 as budget party fare, which was code for impress people with ingredients that never spoil. The recipe appeared in both the lunch and entertaining sections, acknowledging that sometimes lunch was performative. Office parties featured competitive cheese balls. Whose was roundest? Whose had the best coating? Who achieved optimal beef distribution? These weren't idle competitions. Cheese ball superiority translated to social capital in the suburban hierarchy. "Why is it a ball?" my cousin asked at every family gathering. "Why not just serve it in a bowl?" But that was missing the point. The ball shape said effort. The ball shape said care. The ball shape said, "I turned military rations into geometry and you're going to appreciate it." These weren't just recipes. They were artifacts from an America that believed lunch could be theater. Betty Crocker knew something we forgot. Feeding people is creativity, meals are memories, and sometimes the strangest combinations create the strongest connections.